Okay. Good morning and good afternoon. Thank you for joining our weekly It's Worth a Shot series. Today we're going to talk about heading into the holidays and food safety in particular. So next slide, please. So just a disclaimer that we always place in our It's Worth a Shot series that our presenters may be outside speakers, and the information that is provided does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by Mountain Pacific. So next slide, please. Just some updates and reminders. I can't believe next week is Thanksgiving. So we have lots to be grateful for. And we will do a pause on our It's Worth a Shot next week. So give you an opportunity to enjoy that Thanksgiving holiday with your family, friends, and your residents. So we will resume on the following Wednesday, which will be November 29th. Also, it's antibiotic awareness week. Did you guys know they have an antibiotic awareness week? I didn't know that. So celebrate that. There's a link there we'll put in the chat where you can pick up some good tips and tricks in focusing on an antibiotic awareness at your community. And then National Overdose Prevention Leadership Virtual Summit is November 16th and 17th. And so you can click on that link as well to register. Next slide, please. All right. So as always, we love to hear from you on any webinar topics that you would like us to present. So you could drop them into the chat. We also, at the end of the session, we have a survey, and in that survey, we love to hearing your feedback on that. So we kindly ask for webinar topics in there as well. So we will continue to meet every Wednesday. Next slide, please. We actually have a polling question. So Mary, if you want to bring that up for us. Do your residents have access to counseling services, especially around the holidays, within your facility or community? All right. Looks like we have about 37 people on the call today. So take a few seconds and answer that polling question. Do your residents have access to counseling services, especially around the holidays, within your facility or community? Just a few more seconds here. Looks like it's slowing down now. Looks like we have about 54% are saying no, while 46% are saying yes. And in the chat, Jessica, thank you. If someone needs services, we do reach out to someone. Thank you. All right, Mary, we could stop sharing that. Next slide, please. Okay, so just to give a quick influenza snapshot, how we are doing here in the United States. As you see, the red is very high activity level for influenza. Green is in the lower minimal level. So for our region, we see Alaska is at the very high, and Hawaii seems to be at the lowest at this point. So continue on with your awareness and education in getting your influenza shots to your residents and staff. Next slide, please. And the weekly COVID-19 snapshot, we can see here, we have Hawaii that's in a moderate increase. Alaska's kind of a little bit stable, moderate, substantial. There's a little bit of some challenges there with their COVID outbreak. Guam is also looks like they're in substantial. Hospital admissions in the past week is indicating there, but a change in admissions are down by 8%. Next slide, please. All right, so now I want to, we're going to introduce you to Darcy. Darcy Ho is a registered dietitian and is a board certified as a specialist in gerontological nutrition. She resides in Honolulu, Hawaii, and has been serving the long-term care community for the past 17 years. She enjoys helping others develop a good relationship with food to maximize their health and quality of life. Darcy, I'll turn the mic over to you.
All right. Thank you, Jolene, and thank you for everyone for joining us today. So I'd just like to we'll discuss food safety today, and food safety, kitchen sanitation. It is a huge topic. We could go on forever with it. So today I'll just discuss the basics, especially to keep our residents and ourselves too safe, especially during this holiday season, as we're going to see more parties, more function, more get-togethers, which is a great thing. But of course, we don't want anyone to get sick from the food. Next slide, please. So there are different types of contaminants that can cause us to illnesses from food. I think most common people think about as biological are bacterial contaminants, such as E. coli, salmonella. But other biological contaminants are also include your viruses, like your norovirus, hepatitis, that can be spread through food. Parasites such as toxoplasmosis and giardia, and also funguses like yeast and molds. Examples of chemical contaminants would be detergents or pesticides. And usually this occurs with cross-contamination through food, either through improper washing or rinsing of containers or reusing of containers improperly. And then we also have our physical contaminants, things that can fall into our food, such as like hair, plastics, glass, metal. This can happen during the manufacturing process or, just doing food preparation. I had food come back. Someone was wearing fake acrylic nails, which fell into someone's salad. So that's an example of a physical contaminant. Next slide, please. So when we speak of foodborne illnesses and we hear of an outbreak, what constitutes as an outbreak? So according to the CDC, a foodborne disease outbreak occurs when 2 or more people get the same illness from the same contaminated food or drink. So it doesn't take much, just 2 people having the same symptoms from eating the same thing. Of course, our high-risk groups, people that cannot bounce back from these infections as well are our older adults, 65 and older, children who are younger than 5, anyone who's immunocompromised, such if they're going through chemo treatments, and pregnant women. So they're more likely to become sick from foodborne illnesses and having a more difficult recovery, especially since common symptoms are nausea and vomiting, diarrhea, which can increase the risk of dehydration and kidney injury. A lot of it's just painful with the stomach crampings and fever as well. And some of these symptoms can be short term, might resolve within a day or 2. Others might have some long term effects, and with severe cases, can also lead to death. With foodborne illnesses and disease outbreaks, it can be something on a small scale, like a potluck, or it can be nationwide. And we often hear about recalls in the news. More often than not, foodborne illnesses usually occur within homes due to us being more lax on standards. But we also see large outbreaks in more congregate type settings, such as your daycare centers, nursing homes. We hear about cruise ships. Norovirus is pretty common there. Just because just one item, just have a higher concentration of people that's being exposed to can easily cause an outbreak. Next slide, please. So of course in the news, listeria, so October 2021, a couple years ago, package status, and it seems to come up quite often that package status contaminated listeria, usually due to contaminated water. Last year, I'm sure all of us were affected by the Lion Magnus recall for possible contamination, and this also affected a lot of our nutrition supplements like our Glucernas. It wiped out a lot of our thickened liquids and beverages for our residents. So that was really challenging, especially with supply chain issues that just kind of threw another wrench into things. And more recently, a couple months ago, fresh diced onions was contaminated with salmonella. So usually any pre-cut fruits or vegetables are at high risk of being contaminated just because, this more surface area that's being cut through, such as cut melons in the supermarket. You're supposed to wash the whole fruit before cutting. One mistake people do is they don't wash their melons before cutting it, not realizing that there might be some bacteria or some other contaminants on the outside of the rind. They put that on the cutting board, slice the knife through, and now that knife touches the eating surface of the fruit, and now you have a foodborne illness potential there. So currently, according to the USDA, there's 27 active recall cases. This can be related to foreign matter in products, bacterial contaminations, undeclared allergens, or lack of inspection. It ranges from chicken patties to meatballs. So there's a lot of food out there that has potential to make us sick. Next slide, please. So oftentimes we'll go to a party or a buffet or a potluck and we'll look at a food and be like, that one looks like it's gonna make me kind of sick or looks kind of questionable. Others look safe. So what makes one food more at risk than others? So in the food safety world, we have an acronym called FATTOM. FATTOM, and it stands for things that can cause conditions for bacteria to grow. So by limiting those conditions, you can reduce the risk of foodborne illnesses. So first off, the type of food is usually proteins, like raw meat, seafood, eggs, dairy products, especially if it's unpasteurized. Acidity, bacteria don't like acidic environments. So if you think of pickles, it's not likely to spoilage. Time and temperature abuse, that's kind of a big one. So time, within 2 hours, there can be exponential growth of bacteria. So a temperature, if that's not controlled, that the bacteria can proliferate. With temperatures, it can be kind of confusing. A lot of people, they like to use, like USDA, they have the food temperature danger zone, which is 40 to 140 degrees. And that's where most of us like to comfortably live as well, along with the bacteria. But CMS, their CMS guidelines is cold foods need to be held at less than 41 degrees, and hot foods need to be held at 135 degrees or greater. So if your facility is using the 40 to 140 range, you're fine because you still fall within that CMS standard. Again, this is code for holding temperature and for holding temperatures for hot foods, not internal cooking temperatures. Okay, another factor for bacterial growth is oxygen. Most organisms are aerobic, except for if you think of things like botulism, then they're one of the few bacteria that can grow in vacuum packages or canned foods in anaerobic environments. So of course, if you see any dented cans or leaky cans, misshapen, just kind of throw those out to be safe. And last on the list is moisture. So like us, bacteria need water to thrive. So, foods with low content water like jerkies, jams, dry noodles, crackers, or, in general, shelf stable items are not likely for spoilage. So the more moisture is, the more likely spoilage there will be. So example, for your grains, crackers are less likely to be at risk for spoilage versus fresh pasta. Next slide, please. So to keep everyone safe, we want to make sure that we continually monitor. We want to make sure that our kitchens are procuring supplies from reputable suppliers. And one of the great things about going through good suppliers is that they'll actually notify you if there's any recalled items that you've ordered. So a lot of facilities do have gardens where residents participate with growing fruits and vegetables, and that is allowed as long as you follow your local regulations with proper washing, storage, and labeling of those produce items. Hand washing is a big one. I know we're always on our staff about that with hand washing and proper hand hygiene. Sanitation is also important with equipment, dishes, making sure that staff follow the cleaning schedules. Any outside food brought in by family, we want to make sure that we inspect them. When they go out with their families, we have no control of where they're eating or what they're eating. But at least when they bring food into the facilities, we want to make sure that the food that they're being provided is safe. Also, with families bringing food, sometimes they're not aware, or either intentionally or unintentionally, they'll provide residents with outside foods that might not be appropriate for them. But we'll discuss that more. They'll have a sample policy and procedure at the end, so we can discuss that. Pest control is another thing, especially here in Hawaii. It's nice and warm, and the bugs sure love us. So we have to always make sure that we keep our food safe from roaches, rats, and other types of infestations. And storage areas, always kind of monitoring both your dry and cold storage. Make sure you have staff designated to look at that for any signs of infestation or anything that looks like it's not going to hold with spoilage, and to throw those out. Next slide, please. So we want to be proactive and not wait till we have a foodborne outbreak of a foodborne illness. So I'll always monitor state regulations. They're always changing. So these meetings are really great to just share knowledge and best practices. Have regular inspections before your regular state or federal inspections. It's good to use, new people, have fresh eyes. If you always have the same person monitoring your kitchen and food, they kind of get used to looking at certain things and might not realize that other things might be slipping by. Again, check that their staff is following their cleaning schedules and filling out their logs for temperatures. And most of all, make sure that we have adequate staffing. I know staffing has always been a challenge across the board for all departments everywhere. And, from observation, when people are short, they have so much to do, they might rush. And this is when corners get cut and safety might be at risk. Next slide, please. All right, a couple true, false questions. So the 5-second rule, true or false? If I drop something on the floor, it's good for as long as I pick it up before 5 seconds. I can still eat it or use it. Okay, so that will be false. So not just food, but also things that touch food, such as gloves, utensils, dishes, cooking implements. If something falls on the floor, the microbes are transferred to the item pretty much instantaneously. They don't wait 4 seconds and then jump on. So just pretend the floor is lava. If you drop it, it's gone. So people, they don't want to throw food away because it's expensive. It might be limited, but the cost of having a foodborne disease outbreak in your facility outweighs the cost of throwing out that item. One thing I see, so people are usually good about throwing out food, but they're not so good about if they drop a lid for a pan or a pot that has to be washed and sanitized again. I've seen people pull out gloves from a box and a whole bunch of gloves fall out on the floor, and they'll pick it up and shove it back in the box. No, once that touches the floor, it's contaminated. It's going to touch food and other items. Those need to be thrown out. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, second true or false question. The last thing I ate is what made me sick. Okay, so that's kind of false. So not necessarily. I'm glad to see most people are answering false. So depending on the type of organism, the onset of the symptoms can occur at different times. Most common, again, is nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, stomach pain, and cramps. So with some microbes, like staph infection, if that's in your food, you usually feel symptoms within an hour. Could make you sick. Noroviruses can take anywhere from 12 to 48 hours, and E. coli infections through food poisoning take 3 or 4 days. So depending on the type of what was ingested, it can vary in time, and not necessarily the last thing they ate made you sick. That's why you want to monitor if more than one person has the same symptom from eating the same thing. Okay, so next slide, please. So education is a big thing to preventing foodborne illnesses, not just with staff, but also with our families. So CMS requires facilities to have a policy and procedure for any outside food. So hopefully everyone has one in place for their facility. Of course, we want to make sure we follow state regulations, make sure it's stored properly, labeled. We discuss reheating and when to discard items. We usually see an influx of outside food brought in from friends and families, especially around holiday seasons, their birthdays, special events. Not just families though, but residents, they're also more tech savvy nowadays. I have residents ordering from Uber Eats or ordering their own pizza to be delivered. So we want to make sure that our policy addresses these items. We want to make sure that the item being brought in from outside is labeled properly. It needs to have their name and room number. If it's not in the original container, you have to identify what the product is. So if it's yogurt that's brought in its original container, name and date should be sufficient, since we already know it's yogurt. But if it's in a piece of Tupperware, then we need to identify what it is. We want to make sure that we store the cold foods properly. Again, less than 41 degrees or below. Preferably not in the facility kitchen. We want to make sure that we reduce the mingling of facility foods and outside foods. So it's best to have a designated separate refrigerator for residents' food. I know some residents have their own personal refrigerators in the room as well. And with those refrigerators, we want to make sure that we're monitoring temperatures of that as well. You want to specify any shelf-stable items. Some people like to bring in potato chips or sodas. So usually those are allowed to be kept in residents' rooms. Of course, we want to make sure, again, that we label with their name and room number. And just to make sure that we also monitor when to dispose things. So if it's in the refrigerator. From facilities I worked at, it varies. Some facilities only allow food to be brought in for that one meal to be consumed, and anything left over is discarded. Other facilities will allow things up to 3 days. And if you're holding things for multiple meals, when reheating it, make sure the staff is trained to reheat them to a proper temperature. Although hot holding temperature for food needs to be 135 degrees or more, to reheat any leftover food, it has to be heated to 165 degrees. And how do we know that it's 165 degrees? We need to use a thermometer. So we want to make sure that we have the supplies available for staff, and they know to monitor for that too. When we're disposing food because either it's out of range or it's not appropriate for the resident, we want to make sure that we discuss with the family or the visitor why we cannot give this to the resident or why we need to dispose it. A lot of times when people are bringing food in, it's their way of showing love and care. So we want to make sure that we are gentle with the families when we have to discard anything that they brought in for their loved one. But I always emphasize that, safety comes first. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so attached is a sample policy and procedure if your facility does not already have one in place. It's very boilerplate, so you want to personalize it to your facility. Make sure you have a designated person to monitor these refrigerators to make sure they're at temperature. Ensure that there is an internal thermometer to check the refrigerator temp. Some refrigerators have external thermometers, but sometimes we can't calibrate those and they may not be reliable. So internal thermometers is the standard and the way to go for monitoring that. In addition to the policy and procedure sample, there's also a link to the USDA website for any active food recalls. On this website, there's a lot of good information too about, you can filter it by state, by food, to see what's going on with any food recalls that might be affecting your facility. There's also links available on the site for safe food handling and preparation. Again, so when educating our families, when they come in, we want to make sure that they understand that there is a policy for outside foods, but we also want to provide that education component so that they know how to keep food safe and what's proper. So there's a brochure on there you can print out, no sense reinventing the wheel. You can provide that to families so that are aware of food safety practices to keep their loved ones safe. Okay, next slide, please. So that's mostly all I have for today. If anybody have any questions, we just want to make sure that we keep our residents safe, and when in doubt, to just throw it out. Not just our residents, but our staff as well. Staffing is already challenging. We don't need everybody to get sick from the potluck and call out sick. So if any questions, I'll be happy to answer them if I'm able to.
Thank you, Darcy. That was actually a really great presentation. Do we have anybody that wants to come off mute or anybody that wants to put a question in chat?
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So the issue of families bringing in food, which is pretty common in Hawaii, and I see residents that have food that has been there for quite a long time, and I guess staff feel very uncomfortable telling somebody when something should be thrown out. We had one resident who had some bread that was getting moldy, and the facility got cited for that, and it wasn't even their bread. It was the family that had brought it in, and he had a little storage, a little canteen in his bedroom. So what is the best way to kind of monitor food that's coming in, that it's not coming from the kitchen? You really don't know the quality of the food, and it's not really being stored properly. Thank you.
That is a great question, and we see that quite a bit. So it is a resident right to have outside food brought in. So I think it's important to especially share the policy with families, and when they're admitted, so they can share it with other family members and visitors as well. If they want to bring in anything, to make sure they check with facility staff whether, first of all, if it's safe, and two, if it's appropriate. We had people bring in regular food for someone's on a puree diet, or thin or sodas for someone on honey thickened liquids. So we want to make sure that's appropriate and safe for them. And sometimes they don't follow that. They might sneak it by, but it's important to educate the staff as well to look at these things. I know residents, they like to kind of tuck things away and hoard things sometimes. And they like to kind of hold on to their belongings. And some of them, especially when cognition starts to fade, they might not recognize that food's not safe for them, either sense of smell or growing up during the Depression era, they just don't throw things away. I know it is an uncomfortable situation to tell someone that something's no longer safe, but I would just emphasize that it's no longer safe and that it has to be thrown away. If you're getting resistance, calling in family to kind of help speak to them can kind of be helpful too. Of course, moldy bread, should not be given to residents. So it's just constant monitoring. We might not catch everything, but I think just kind of making staff aware, families aware, and talking to our residents too is the most we can do and the best way to go.
Darcy, thank you so
Darcy.
much. And in your presentation, you also mentioned, I think it was mentioned on the United States Department of Agriculture food recall website. Was that the same website where our listeners can also log in to get the brochure, the educational brochure? Was that the same website?
Yeah, same website.
Okay.
I think there's a link at the top for food safety somewhere, and then,
Okay.
they have like a bunch of different topics, and there is a brochure that can
Okay.
be downloaded and printed.
Very
And there's
good.
a lot of free stuff on the internet too, from the USDA, FDA, a lot of organization about food safety.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Any other questions? Miranda did put the, thank you. She put the link into the chat, so you will be able to click on that food safety website and look for that brochure that Darcy was mentioning. Please remember to also take a few minutes to complete the evaluation for this event. We always love to hear your feedback. That is also in the chat. Just click on that. It takes literally 10 seconds to respond to that. So any other questions for our listeners for Darcy? Okay.
You can go to the next slide. Yeah.
Yeah, next slide. All right. Thank you all very much for joining in today's It's Worth a Shot. As a reminder, we will not be meeting next Wednesday due to the Thanksgiving holiday, but we'll meet you back here again next Wednesday on November 29th. And Miranda, what is our topic for that day?
We are kind of up in the air. We are in the works with a resource tool to track staff training, tracking tool. We're hoping that will be up and running for us to present on. If not, we'll have a very fun topic to replace it. But we're also talking about holiday decorating guidelines from Survey, which some of you might have seen an email that came out from us just a little bit ago that has some attachments on it that discuss decorating guidelines for the holiday. So we will be going over that.
All right, very good. Thank you all very much. Thank you for joining in today's call. And all of you have a wonderful Thanksgiving holiday. We have much to be grateful and blessed about. So enjoy your Thanksgiving. Aloha until next time.